Imagine this. You walk into an airport convenience store, tired and stressed just before your flight. You pick up a simple chocolate bar. Outside the airport, this costs barely a few dollars. Inside, the exact same product, same brand, same size, same packaging, suddenly costs 120% more. That means you're paying more than double for absolutely no added value. And it doesn't stop at chocolates. Take a burger from Chili's, for example. On the street, it's reasonably priced. Inside the airport, the same burger is marked up by nearly 46%. The fries aren't crispier, the burger isn't fresher, and the portion isn't larger. It's the same food at an inflated price. We've all felt it. That sinking feeling when we buy a bottle of water for $6 or a sandwich for $15. We know we're being overcharged, but most of us still give in because we feel like we don't have a choice. But have you ever wondered why this happens? Why are airports allowed to charge so much? And who is really making money out of this system? To understand today's overpriced terminals, we need to rewind the clock back to the early 20th century. Airports back then were nothing like the glossy glass and steel structures we see today. They looked more like train stations, crowded, noisy, and often dirty. The glamour was only in the flying itself. Once you stepped onto the airplane, the experience felt luxurious, but the terminal was not the place you wanted to spend time in. Airports, in fact, struggled to make money, so they tried everything they could. They charged small fees for parking. They built observation decks where people could watch planes take off, and they even experimented with pay toilets to squeeze out every possible penny. Some airports even had unusual revenue ideas, like oil wells and swimming pools on site. Nothing was too strange if it could bring in money. But then came a shift. By the 1950s and 60s, airports started to realize that restaurants could become big attractions, not just for travelers, but for the general public. In some towns, airport restaurants became destinations for special occasions. People went there for anniversaries, birthdays, and even high school proms. The terminals themselves began transforming into architectural marvels. Airports wanted to look modern, stylish, and inspiring, not only to attract passengers, but to convince more people that air travel itself was the future. These upgrades weren't just about design. They were about building a system where airports could finally profit directly from the people walking through their gates. For a long time, flying was reserved for the wealthy and businessmen. But in 1978, the US government deregulated the airline industry. This was a turning point in aviation history. Suddenly, airlines could set their own fares and routes without heavy government control. Almost overnight, ticket prices started dropping. Suddenly, middle-class families, students, and budget-conscious travelers could afford to fly. Air travel wasn't a luxury anymore. It was becoming a part of everyday life. But with cheaper tickets came another big change. Service inside the airplane itself began to decline. Gone were the gourmet meals, free drinks, and fancy extras. Instead, passengers got peanuts, pretzels, and soda cans. What airlines took away, airports decided to provide. And since passengers now spent more time waiting in terminals, especially with the rise of connecting flights, airports saw an opportunity. They realized that if travelers were stuck inside for hours, they could be persuaded to spend money. And so, in the 1980s and 90s, airports began evolving into shopping malls. The turning point came in the early 1990s with Pittsburgh International Airport. It was the first U.S. airport to fully embrace the concept of an air mall. Instead of a dull waiting area, Pittsburgh filled its terminal with more than 100 shops and restaurants. This completely changed the passenger experience. Travelers weren't just waiting anymore. They were shopping, eating, and enjoying themselves. And here's the genius part. Pittsburgh introduced street pricing, which meant that whatever something cost downtown, it would cost the same inside the airport. No extra markups. This policy wasn't just fair, it was revolutionary. The results were astonishing. Within 6 years, Pittsburgh's airport revenue soared by 75% without passengers feeling ripped off. People were happy to spend because the prices felt normal, and businesses were happy because foot traffic inside the terminal was huge. For a moment, it seemed like airports had cracked the code, making money while keeping passengers satisfied. Other airports quickly tried to copy this model, pouring millions into renovations and adopting their own versions of street pricing. But like many good ideas, it didn't last. Today, the majority of US airports operate under something called Street Pricing Plus. On paper, this means a product should cost the same as it does outside the airport, plus an extra 10 to 15% to cover higher operating costs. Airports say this adjustment is reasonable and necessary, but here's the catch. How they define street price is often vague and easily manipulated. Take LaGuardia Airport in New York. A chocolate bar there was sold for more than double its city price, even though the rules supposedly capped it at 15% higher. At Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, simple items like M&Ms cost nearly 70% more than Walgreens outside. Yogurt was marked up by a staggering 84%. Audits exist, but enforcement is weak, and companies find ways to stretch the rules. The result? Passengers keep paying far more than they should, while airports and corporations rake in profits. Airport businesses defend themselves by saying, it's just more expensive to operate here. And they're not entirely wrong. Every single delivery, from sandwiches to napkins, has to go through strict security checks. Construction costs can be up to 40% higher inside airports because of these security and safety rules. Employees often earn higher minimum wages because many cities set special wage laws for airport workers. On top of that, these businesses pay a share of their revenue, sometimes up to 16%, back to the airport as rent. But here's the part you won't hear in press releases. These costs alone don't explain $6 water bottles or $15 sandwiches. The real driver of high prices is lack of competition. And this is where things get even darker. When you walk into an airport food court, it feels like you have choices. Maybe Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, Chili's, Hudson News, or some local-looking shop. But what most passengers don't realize is that almost all of these outlets are controlled by a handful of mega corporations. In the US, just 6 major companies dominate airport food and retail. For example, HMS Host, owned by Avolta, operates countless locations. At Minneapolis-St. Paul, they run everything from the duty-free shops to the Hudson News convenience stores to multiple restaurants. Even that local-looking market might secretly be managed by Hudson under the same corporate umbrella. Another giant, OTG, runs over 350 locations across North America. These corporations are so powerful that they often push airports to raise their pricing caps, or, in some cases, eliminate them entirely. In short, when you think you're choosing between different options, you're often just choosing which division of the same parent company gets your money. Real competition is almost non-existent. The situation became even worse after 9/11. With strict new security measures, passengers could no longer bring drinks or large amounts of food past checkpoints. Suddenly, everyone was forced to buy inside the terminal if they wanted to eat or drink. Add longer wait times for security, and passengers were now spending hours stuck in terminals with no escape. This waiting period, known in the industry as dwell time, became a goldmine. Studies show that 63% of passengers make a purchase during this time, whether it's food, drinks, or shopping out of boredom. Airports took full advantage. Terminals were redesigned, so passengers had to walk past rows of shops and food outlets before reaching their gate. The goal was simple: make sure travelers were hungry, thirsty, and surrounded by expensive options. Over time, this became a central part of airport business models. Today, nearly half of US airport revenue comes from non-aeronautical sources like food, retail, and parking, not from airlines. Surprisingly, yes. A handful of airports still stick to real street pricing. Portland International Airport, PDX, is the most famous example. At PDX, the price you pay downtown is the price you pay inside the airport. No markups, no plus fees. And guess what? It works beautifully. Passengers actually spend more at PDX than the national average, proving that fair pricing doesn't hurt business. It helps it. But unfortunately, Portland is the exception. Most airports are moving in the opposite direction. Los Angeles International Airport, LAX for example, scrapped its 18% cap in 2025. Now, businesses there can charge whatever they want. And industry groups are openly lobbying for flexible pricing, which is just a nice way of saying no limits at all. With rising costs everywhere, rent, groceries, fuel, travelers are running out of patience. A JD. Power Survey consistently shows that food and beverage prices are the lowest rated part of the airport experience. In 2025, even members of Congress wrote to the Federal Trade Commission, urging them to investigate extreme markups at airports and stadiums. Yet despite public frustration, airports and concession companies have little incentive to change.